Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Horseman, and I am a data evangelist with Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, The Importance of Ethics in Data and AI Governance. It is the latest installment in the monthly series Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them by the Q&A section. If you would like to chat with us or chat with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just panelists, but you may absolutely switch that to network with everyone. To open the Q&A or the chat panel, you'll see the icons for those features in the bottom middle of your screen. To answer the most commonly asked question, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within a couple of business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we're recording and we'll likewise send a link to the recording of this session as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Dr. Aiken is an acknowledged data management authority and associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, president of DAMA International, and has founded several data-focused for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. For more than 40 years, Peter has learned from working with hundreds of data management practices in 35 countries, including some of the world's most important. Among his books are the first on CDOs, The Case for Data Leadership, focusing on data monetization, on modern strategic data thinking, and objectively specifying what it means to be data literate. International recognition has resulted in an intensive schedule of events worldwide. Peter also hosts the longest running data management webinar series hosted here at Dataversity. Starting before Google, before data was big, and before data science, Peter has founded several companies that have helped more than 200 organizations leverage data-specific savings that have been measured at more than 1.5 billion United States dollars. His latest is Anything Awesome LLC. Hello and welcome, my friend, Dr. Peter Aiken.
Got to come off mute there, right? Of
Yeah,
course.
I was going to
Mark,
say you're muted, buddy.
it's so good to see you last month at the conference out in San Diego. It was a
You as
wonderful
well.
event, and it was terrific. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk specifically, obviously, about ethics in this context, but it's real important that we do it in order to sort of get us from where we want to start to where we want to go. Order of program, then we're going to start off by defining terms, governance, then AI and data governance each, and then we'll add the term ethics into it as well. We'll then move into a sort of standard ethical dilemma, look at it from a data perspective, from an AI perspective, and more importantly, from the integrative perspective, which is really the most productive to take a look. If you run into ethics, you will recall the concept of ethical lenses, and we'll talk about what they are and just how they can be used in there. We'll look at some very specific focus of these, three examples in this case, and then finish off with a framework for ethical decision making leading to a roadmap, and we'll summarize about an hour from now. So look forward to your questions at that point in time, and Mark joining us as well. I want to acknowledge that part of this material was co-developed with my friend and colleague Karen Lopez. On this, she's and I probably had the first ethics discussions around this topic early on, and many times people come up and think that it's unfortunately just a no-win situation, that there's no way to turn. Hopefully, we'll simplify that a little bit today. Let's start off with the word governance, and this is just the idea of a system of rules or processes by which organizations or societies are directed, controlled, and held liable, held accountable. It's a challenge, but there are some principles that we've come to over the years: transparency, accountability, equity, and inclusiveness, the rule of law, and effectiveness and efficiency, to name just a couple that go into that. We've always had corporate governance, but it's been more articulated recently. Jamie Dimon, minor detour before COVID aside, there may be something to this. Then IT got involved and said, well, of course, we want to make sure that we're doing what the business wants us to do and prove it in measurable results so that we don't get accused of not measuring the right metrics and providing a a bad return on the investment that they're making in IT. And they're basically five pillars that they've been working on in this case. Now we move on to data governance, and data governance really is just managing data with guidance. Sometimes if we move up the food chain a little bit, I'll change the definition slightly, but the way this is formed, the question, would you want your soul non-depletable, non-degrading, durable, strategic asset managed without guidance? And most people would say no. The minor tweak I make here is just to add the word decisions, because really data is one thing, but many people make decisions that they aren't realizing are data decisions. And I'm hopeful that at the end of this program, you'll be able to identify some of those more directly in order to see that. My favorite description when having to ask what is the difference between data governance and AI governance comes from Claire Kitching. If you haven't seen her work, she has done some really remarkable work. First piece that she does by simplifying it, yes, Claire is absolutely wonderful. Um, a whole list of her stuff that's out there on that. But she distinctions the two, data governance being inputs and AI governance governing outputs. It's a nice, easy break for most people to get in terms of that. And data governance then being about trustworthy inputs where everybody has data that has been governed. If it's reached a certain level, then it can be shared among stakeholders and risks, again, maturity pitfalls. These are the kinds of things that go into that. AI governance then looks at outcomes, and the goal is safe, ethical, effective AI with, again, appropriate groups involved in this. Just, brilliant piece of articulation here. Why reinvent the wheel? She's done a great job. So let's see where that can take us. Well, first of all, most organizations unfortunately have run into a bad decision. It says 65% says no one at their organization fully understands data, which is a really sad thing to say that nobody understands this. This leads us to what I've referred to many times as the bad data decision spiral, where business decision makers are not knowledgeable about data decisions and technical decision makers are not, leading to, of course, bad data decisions. Those bad data decisions then result in badly treated data assets and poor quality of data. These both lead to poor organizational outcomes on this, and the cycle unfortunately repeats and repeats.
This is wrong.
It may have been hard to hear, but I sampled Morgan Freeman saying this is wrong. It is. Take an example for a very good product, Salesforce, and understand that somebody might make a decision to implement Salesforce as of a certain date. We're at May 12th, 2006 here. We could go then say that implement Salesforce by June 1st. Well, unfortunately, IT is still a difficult discipline to implement, and most implementations are challenged in one form or another. Nothing happens on projects typically that makes them become shorter projects. They tend to become longer. But by pushing for Salesforce to be live as of a certain date as your major deliverable, a major milestone is really the wrong way to think about it. A better way to think about it would be to say that when the data has been cleaned to a certain level of specification, it should go into Salesforce, because otherwise the user population can't tell the difference between Salesforce full of bad data, good software, bad data, or bad software in here. So again, this is just wrong to be able to do this. We need to look around this and say there's an ethical component here. And while most people haven't dove into it recently, it is important to start thinking about this. So this is the idea that we have standards and practices that say how you ought to act. Now, unfortunately, it may be the case that you've never been in a situation such as you're in the first place. It is novel. But once again, you can prepare for it. And the goal, very simply, is to not have the first conversation that you have about ethics be in the middle of a crisis. And almost any other result will result in a better outcome around that. Um, Ethics is how we end up feeling about things after they've been done. And again, being ethical requires knowledge, skills, and habits in order to do this. These habits are so ingrained that some of you may remember the name Buzz Aldrin. Well, Buzz was the astronaut that flew in one of the manned spacecraft as we were getting ready to get to the moon. And I've enlarged a section of the diagram that purports to be his travel voucher, saying that his points of travel were from Houston, Texas, back to Houston, Texas via Kennedy Center, Florida, the moon, Pacific Ocean, USS Hornet, Hawaii, and then back to Houston, Texas. But in order to do this, he also filled out a travel voucher. I've been a government servant myself long enough to know how to fill these things out and have done so on many times. The point was he was ethical about following the rules. Well, once again, if this is the first piece that you're encountering as ethics, the general thrust is that should I thinking must replace can I thinking. And that this group is being capable of being bound by specific behaviors in order to do that. But if you haven't read, say, Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill or seen Coded Bias, I can tell you that Coded Bias was purchased by literally every university that I've run into. So if you have a student that's local to your university, it's also on Netflix if you have access to that particular streaming platform. These are the question comes to me most often after turning folks on to code bias is, do you think my boss knows this material? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, they haven't been bound to this. They haven't been able to get inculcated the way this does. So when you look at a mirror and not see yourself in there, sorry, not a mirror, a visual system, but not see yourself in there, it can be quite disconcerting. So there's a couple of different ways of approaching ethics in here, which is how to protect, garner, and use this type of material, focusing on moral obligations. Again, if somebody gives me something in confidence, I shouldn't pass it on. And there are some studies that people are doing, but it's not an easy field to study. But it does, post hoc analysis around this, looking with respect to bad data society impacts. Nobody can say, and we'll dive into it a little bit further, but that surveillance capitalism has had a positive impact on society, where we've traded as a society a lot of our privacy for advertising, and that's not a trade that anybody would make knowing it consciously. Moral obligations around all of these things. But yet there's another school that says, well, here's another way of defining it. There's no right answer or wrong answer, but that's a good place for you all to start, is what's going on in your organization. So the difference between what you have the right to do and what is the right thing to do is the idea of having a formal foundation on here that the ethical actions are going to go way beyond any sort of project timelines. It's really a program activity. And then these are all different topics that can come out through the exploration of these topics as long as you talk about it in advance. I'll get to the importance of that in just a minute, but just keep that in mind. Would you think that these situations would be tolerable? Uh, One point, my colleague Amy Webb said that if you don't work for one of these nine organizations, whatever you're doing with AI is a joke. That's harsh words. I would argue that that's a failure of data governance, because it is important to have governance involved in the ability to tell an organization the truth about whether it can do something or whether it's just trying to fool itself. Another wonderful book Nina Schick wrote, Deepfakes, a little while back, but had a prediction that said all but a small content of the internet will be AI generated by 2026. And I don't think that's come to pass, nor do I think it'll come to pass this year, but it is scary when you consider that AI is still about an 85% a B student, and that 15% compounded continuously process means that it's a race for the bottom line as other organizations try to cheaply get in and copy what's gone on to this. I would argue that that's a failure of AI governance around there. And the last one I mentioned before already, the surveillance capitalism. If you haven't become privy to what's going on in here, it's an amazing piece. She's got some wonderful pieces that are out on YouTube if you don't want to take the trouble to read the book, but it was a great book. Again, I'll say it's a data governance failure in that. And when you ask AI, what are the outcomes that can come out? It says, well, risk and compliance, operational excellence and reliability, economic value, and trust and human centricity, right? Well, great to say all those things. The reality from a consultants organization's perspective is that divide and conquer works best in terms of profit maximization. So be careful as people try to treat these as separate silos without realizing that there's a lot more in common than they have separately in order to do this. So, quick bit of just sort of summary here. We all agree that regardless of AI or data governance, catching input errors for the benefit of AI actually benefits the entire organization, right? Secondly, that catching them systematically is more effective and efficient than playing whack-a-mole, as much as this kitty cat is having wonderful fun in order to do this. And that creating a professional cadre of individuals who are good at this also benefits the organization because it derives some particular special focused energy in this area and the ability to see crosswise on these items in here. So that's the terms and definitions here. Let's dive into an ethical dilemma. And the first piece is to understand that the information age has introduced some different concepts for us. We now have information rights and obligations, but most of us click past our EULAs because we've proven mathematically that it's impossible to read all of the information on the EULA and the attached other EULAs that would be involved if you followed all the threads to get an absolute answer to your question. So it's unfortunate that that's the case, and something will probably have to change sooner or later about that, but right now it's an issue. Um, we have certain property rights and obligations in the digital age that are very different from the way they were before. Again, whether you think meme coins are useful or not, it's certainly been a concept that has come about. Accountability and control, system quality and quality of life are the other pieces that all get together in here and focus on this. But I'm going to start off here with a something that if you haven't heard about it before, um, welcome. And if you have, hopefully this will be a real quick, it's a 90-second video of this, but it describes a problem that there is no right answer to. So don't look at this and try to figure out what is the right answer, what is the thing to do, but to figure out what framework is important to you. What are your values around this? And this relates to the accountability and control and quality of life.
A runaway train is heading towards 5 workers on a railway line. There's no way of warning them, but you're standing near a lever that operates some points. Switch the points, and the train goes down a spur. Trouble is, there's another worker on that bit of track too, but it's 1 fatality instead of 5. Should you do that? Many people think the right thing to do would be to switch the points, to sacrifice 1 to save 5, since that produces the best outcome possible. Now imagine the train heading for the workers again. This time it can only be stopped by pushing a very large man off a bridge. His great bulk would stop the train, but he'd die. Should you do that? Most people say no. But why not? Both thought experiments are cases of sacrificing 1 to save 5. What the trolley problem examines is whether moral decisions are simply about outcomes or about the manner in which you achieve them. Some utilitarians argue that the 2 cases are not importantly different from each other. Both have similar consequences, and consequences are all that really matter. In each case, 1 person dies and 5 are saved, the best option in each harrowing situation. But lots of people say they would switch the points, but they wouldn't push the man off the bridge. Are they simply inconsistent, or are they onto something?
Once again, no right answers on here, but what if approaching this from a data perspective, a malfunctioning sensor incorrectly reported the number of workers on the track? Is that fall into an ethics dilemma, I believe? What if the sensors incorrectly report 5 souls on the track? What if there's nobody actually there causing you to go and kill somebody needlessly in this case? What if an individual urging you to push the large individual off the bridge incorrectly estimates and you end up killing 6 people instead of 5? What if the scale incorrectly stops you because of insufficient weight? These are all questions that can come up from an AI perspective. You could apply to the same scenario. What if AI incorrectly estimates the number of workers on the track based on statistical precisions and not based on rain conditions? What if an AI makes a decision to actually switch the thing for you, or you feel better about it having you not having to do it? The trolley AI actually switching the track, that would be quite, a taking a line. Again, clearly weighing one versus the other. Again, what if AI stops you from pushing the large individual because you think you're harming the individual and prevents you from saving them? These are not easy answers to answer. Again, nothing to save one, sacrifice five. Again, the movie says it very, very well. Is it about just the outcomes, or is it about how we achieve the outcomes? And again, the only thing that you can hope for your organization is that the first time you have this discussion, it will not be in the middle of a crisis, because it just gives very, very bad thinking under pressure kind of situations aren't way to do it. So good for an organization to provide a framework. What if you went to an organization and they said, always do this? Well, if you didn't feel like always doing that, you may choose not to go to work for that organization, and that's fine. But if you're always going to be having to push the individual off the bridge, you have to prepare for it mentally and physically in order to get to that state, is perhaps a consequence that would come from there. These don't exist for most organizations, and data literacy is at such a low rate that conversations are just not even considered. Generally not part of any academic programs, especially around data science communities in this. And the idea, of course, you can see here is that if data in, is biased, and that's the whole purpose, that's the challenge that you have here, because data doesn't actually create, it amplifies what's already there. It gives you algorithmic accountability from that, and that knowing that you have data lineage is a defensible. Without the data lineage, you cannot do the audit. And so that's going to be an incredibly bad thing. Statistical malpractice is a real thing. And again, if a bank just doesn't have an idea that it was discriminating 30 years ago, but here's all the loan data, it's going to learn the loan data, even though it won't see any systems that occur. Bias originates in the data. So it's critical to have, where did it come from, and what are the circumstances, and what have we done to demonstrate our ability to help eliminate these things from the models that we're trying to produce. Again, sort of garbage in, garbage out, but if you saw somebody presenting at the emergency department with pneumonia and asthma, the evaluation might be saying no big deal. I would consider that a failure of AI governance, because the data that went in was not incorrect. They just didn't have data on a certain set of emergency room doctors looking at somebody with both pneumonia and asthma and immediately putting them in the intensive care unit, but forgetting to record that information. Consequently, the bad conclusion that it came up with. Again, the idea that it couldn't see Joy Bulimi is just insane in there, and yet literally that was what was happening here. Well, that's a data governance perspective, because it was developed with data that only pertained to the people that created it. In this case, it was pale males around that whole concept. There was a whole series of sentencing systems called Compass that was pervaded in the judicial system some time ago. I think it's gone now, but I don't know. But it had very, very obvious discriminatory bias. You can just Google it and find out. This would be a failure in AI governance, because it should never have been advertised as AI governance or as having AI anything at all, because it didn't. It just simply said it. You put the label on it, you see, and it sells. And finally, here's a really good one of my favorites on here. It's Tesla. Not to pick on Tesla, it's challenging on all of these cars. But what you're going to see here is that this is a red car going to pass a horse and buggy. Watch on the screen here about how the Tesla is trying to interpret it. Here we go. It starts off, remember, it's a horse and buggy, and it was a power truck, and it's a pickup truck passing, and now it's a power truck, a big semi truck. It's coming up here, so we get a little closer in so we can see. You can see the red cars moving off into the distance. Up the big truck sideways. Now it's a semi truck. Now it's a tow truck. Now it's a pickup truck. Oh, it's coming right at us. We better start. It's just a man walking behind a pickup truck. Clearly, you can see they're right up almost on the horse and buggy. And the point is here simply that the software people were not humble enough to decide there was a category that they could not know. It must always be something. This is one of the primary conceits around this area, is that it's just absolutely ridiculous to assume that you can count for all possibilities. all systems should have an other in it, and what should go hand in hand with other? I don't know what's in front of me, so let's apply some caution. Neither of these things occurred on this version of the software. In order to see this, I have no idea whether it's gotten better or not, but I'm certain because it's gotten a lot of play, they won't do this. I call that a failure of AI governance, to failure to identify that there are things I cannot identify in front of me, and I don't know, and I should slow down as a result. There's several things that ethics are not. We can go through them real quick. They're not the same as feelings, religion, following the law, culturally accepted norms. Most important, many of these are in the mix as far as your ethics conversations, and they can complicate things. So be careful with it and make sure that you're able to differentiate. That's not part of the conversation, but they're not part of ethics. Again, we'll move on to these ethical lenses here. Just okay to start off with some general questions. Is it okay to lie, steal, kill, discriminate, pollute, use animals in medical research? No, of course not. It's something that's so easily gotten around at this point. And having a rescue beagle myself, I'm super proud of the fact that we don't have at least that particular one in there. Well, the ethical lenses can come in, and typically you'll see them organized as something called the rights lens, which affects moral rights. Utilitarian, we've talked a little bit about from the video. Justice lens, it talks about equality for everybody. Idealness in the virtue sense, contributions being the common life, and finally the individual being the focus there. Just to, again, we saw the utilitarian perspective illustrated as in what's the difference between pushing somebody off of a large building and actually having a switch point, switching the tracks, right? Well, again, the sides that weren't articulated are the rights lens there and the care ethic lens, the individual's perspective. So that gives you the compare and contrast that come into that. And the reason it's important to keep that in mind is because more and more of us are subject to professional codes. I am a lifetime member of the ACM. Excuse me, AEEE, a long senior member of the ACM, been president of DAMA for the past 6 years. Yeah, I have a lot of professional codes of conduct, and I try to make sure that I hold each that I hold up each and every one of them along the way because it's just too easy to pick on it otherwise. You will kind of run into, or maybe have in the past seen, real world ethical dilemmas. For example, the Psychiatry Society, I forget, APA was, I think, the one that somehow okayed the torture of combatants or non-combatants, and got into a big tussle, came to a very concrete set of changes, I believe, that they implemented as a result. Again, here's just one up in front, something from Harley Reid, who talks about it. Having those sets of values be clearly outlined is something that makes it easy for people who either don't want to uphold them or do want to uphold them to understand what type of an organization is it that you're working for. I mentioned ACM on here. The ACM starts off with, as part of its general ethical principles, 1.2 is to avoid harm. Just kind of nice, very, very simple. Strive to achieve high quality in processes and products, and ensure that the public good is central concern during all professional computing work. These are strong ethics, and it's wonderful to have them. It's probably not going to be too long before some of those ethics come up against perhaps some employment agreements that say, no, in fact, we do want you to act on behalf of the company instead of on behalf of your professional association. I've done some work in that area. It's a very interesting area. The key for it is to understand that these codes of conduct have far, far-reaching implications, and the conclusion of this paper was such that arbitration boards and courts were actually using things such as the IEEE and ACM codes of conduct in absence of finding them from some other place. So a consulting firm in this case had said, you can find our codes anywhere, and when they looked, they weren't found. So it was okay, the courts concluded, to find them in these other organizations who publish them very, very much on their websites in order to see that. So again, you can go to the IEEE website, the ACM website, the DEMA website, and see what the codes of conduct are. Hopefully, it's not a surprise to you as far as that goes. So the idea of taking on any of these things is not that you have to memorize all 6 ethical lenses or to have a very detailed code of conduct. Again, you saw it's very simple. Do no harm. That's a really great place to start from. on this, but that it is helpful if your organization decides that it is utilitarian, and some of them are, to understand what that means to you as an employee, because you're being asked to put, again, yourself in the situation where you would push the large man off of the bridge, perhaps in some instances. So let's look at some very specific foci in here. Now, this was back in October of 2021, so it's a wild old story, but it's still nevertheless very, very interesting. So, a certain jewelry store in mid-London had been hacked, ransomware officially is the term. And as a result of this ransomware, they said, pay up or we're going to point your customers' names and put your customers' data on the web. The company was unable to do that for whatever reason, and the data was put on the web. Now, what happened as a result of this was very, very interesting. Within a couple of days, there were some public pronouncements from the hacker group that said, "My goodness, we are so sorry to have published His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman's family and other members mentioned in the publication. In other words, don't piss off somebody who's quite powerful around that sort of thing." Clearly, they were scared enough in order to do this. So, could you imagine being the data governance professional of this organization? Yes, this was what they did. They pledged. They said they don't sell it, they don't trade it, and from now on they'll implement a more rigid data review process for any future criminal operations. I inserted the word criminal in there. You see where it comes from. Would you advise them correctly in such a standard? I mean, it's part of your job if you're already in there. What advice would you give them? Maybe picking a different jewelry store? Who knows? What advice wouldn't you give them? That'll play up in the future in a third one here. Very, very good articles around both of these. Well documented data governance for criminals. Wow, what a topic. Okay, second one. Oh, sorry, and I'll call that a data governance issue clearly because again, they mentioned they were sorry they had done it. They hadn't vetted it. They didn't have any filters. Clearly, in the future, who knew being a criminal was going to be this difficult on this? Second one is relating to crypto and all the rest of the things that go into it. And the idea in this particular instance was that it was a bad guy. It was using dark web capabilities and things and blockchain to try and hide some transactions. And of course, the key is that if you understand what blockchain is, you know it's nothing but transactions. There is no privacy on the blockchain. In fact, it's very publicity is out there. And did we figure out how to reverse engineer it a long time ago? Yes, it's not easy. Not everybody has it happen, but if you want to follow a blockchain transaction, you absolutely can follow it. This particular person was caught in there because he said he mistakenly believed his Bitcoin transactions to have been private in the first place. Again, it's just an amazing state. Well, this is clearly an AI governance topic. In my estimation, in the sense that if somebody's going to be adding AI to this type of topic on top of Bitcoin, having just exposed it literally makes it so much infinitely searchable faster. It's truly going to be an amazing thing. Not that it doesn't have good uses. We should use it. It's great to have a trusted ledger. It's part of my wife has been bugging me about it to create the uh, um, generally accepted accounting practices of data. So we have GAAP and GAD maybe in there. Anyway, a third one example here is really an ethical issue that happens a lot. Unfortunately, as my positions, I have a lot of ethical discussions, not an abnormal amount, but a certain amount in there. And the first question that always comes up is, does this rise to the occasion? Is it this tall? Must you be this tall to ride this ride, whatever it is? And many people have trouble with that issue because that does represent a commitment. You're putting something to paper, perhaps, not necessarily identity, but it's still making it a formal issue. And that's oftentimes the one that is the most difficult for people to go is from 0 to 1 to get that first piece up in order to do that. And does doing one necessarily influence to two? I mean, that you're kicking off a whole chain of events. People need to understand these things. That's why it's important that these things be published so that somebody who's thinking about it can see that they can come in and offer, perhaps under circumstances, some information anonymously in order to do that. And that might be helpful in order to do that. Again, you want to have a climate to do that. So one of the main things to have in terms of climate is demonstrating it. Have these things be celebrated. If you've ever worked for a safety corporation, a corporation that likes to do, I had a corporation, I think it was in Chicago, that had invited me to come in and give a PowerPoint. And before I could give the PowerPoint, I had to go through an hour's worth of training materials to make sure that I was completely safe about the process. I had no objection to it. It seemed somewhat overkill at the time, but I recognize that this company clearly took safety very, very correctly. Well, again, you can do things like this around to have your organization continuously available to take these things, to process these things, to talk about these things. Again, the last thing you want is the first conversation to be the one that occurs in an emergency. This is going to be applicable to both AI and data governance, given those two situations. It's clear that you need to have ethical inputs on both sides so that people can ask questions about, be informed about, understand the consequences of these things going in to play in order to do that. A great concept here comes from my own iPhone. I asked it the question, zebra, in here, and it came through and gave me 9 photos of zebras. Very, very nice. You can see my hair was longer in those days. The interesting part was when I kept typing, it actually auto-completed to zebra invasion. Now, the nouns are okay. To label the things in the pictures seems to be okay. And again, remember that your phone, Android or iPhone, has now seen and read every sign of every picture that you've ever stood next to, in front of, or sideways to, in order to look at these things. And I do consider, as a horse person, a zebra to be somewhat difficult. It's a horse with stripes, and clearly it got that. But this last part was not correct. It was a zebra invasion. In fact, the key was that we people were invading the zebras, and as in all cases, we should know enough to leave them alone. But certainly was a fun trip out there. Well, this is going to be an AI governance base. There's probably some errors around verbs where the AI is going to be less accurate than it is the nouns. So important to keep an eye out for these things and to understand what it is your organization is planning. Are you going to truly read every sign of every person that they've ever stood in front of? Yes. Again, open your photo app, type in the words of some street that you were on at one time that you might have taken a picture of. And it's another way of doing search within there. I can search on zebras and I will find these 2 characters in the process of doing this. All right. Well, let's talk about then what is really the framework in these areas. And most people think ROI responds directly to return on investment. And while that's partially true, in the AI era, in the digital era, we're now seeing risk of incarceration also become important, primarily among the regulated groups. Again, even though it's occurred in October of 2020, it's my understanding that Citigroup is still involved in this $400 million action around data governance. Again, you can see this was mana to us. It was like having President Obama talk about data governance as a viable career. The kind of thing makes my day. The fact that somebody got in trouble for not putting data governance in place, kind of tough. Actually, the really more important parts of this. The $400 million is a couple minutes worth of their profit, so it's not terribly a lot. It was nice to see money tied to data governance, though, and I can tell you that Citibank, with hindsight, probably says we could have invested that $400 million in data governance instead of in paying a penalty and gotten a better return on our investment. The last piece I highlighted down here, seek the OCC's non-objection. That means if they wanted to grow by acquisition, they had to go specifically back to these guys, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and ask permission in order to do this. And that's never a comfortable position people want to be in banking in that sense. Similarly, there was a related issue of the Federal Reserve Board taking action against these things. So these are tangible pieces, and the question of how to phase this in an ethical way is one that vexes a lot of organizations. So we'll take this gigantic framework here and break it down into some parts. You get the whole picture, of course. Again, first of all, identify the ethical use issues. Put that filter on it. Make sure that you're filtering out between ethical and other types of issues. There are differences. You can isolate the ethical issues. Then you want to get the facts. What is it that we can find out about from a factual perspective? Who are the stakeholders that are involved? I remember making stakeholder involvement diagrams when I was in the Defense Department. It was very important to understand who was on the other side or downstream of these systems and which were the respective concerns given that. Then to evaluate different options. And again, looking at it, they've got it organized according to the six lenses that we talked about before. If your organization focuses on one lens above the others, you would gray out the others that are in there and say what option will produce the most good and do the least harm for as many stakeholders as possible. The typical utilitarian lens question that would be up in there. Then finally, pick an action and test it. So clearly, this is not a tried and proven case. This is how to move forward with ethical dilemmas. And there is, again, certain things that you can do and can't do. But most importantly, implement your decision and reflect upon the outcome and say, how's this working out for us? Because if it doesn't, it's really not well used. Again, all the credit here goes to scu.edu for a great sense on that. Another piece from the off, ODI group out here is this thing called the Data Ethics Canvas. And you can look in here, and if you've passed your process through the ethics canvas, you've probably done some aspects of due diligence within there. Nothing is provable, and again, you'd have to get to the court. Remember that statistical malpractice is real in there. But looking at the different things that are data sources in there, and what are the limitations in that? Oh goodness, I didn't realize the bank had not made loans to this type of person or into this zip code for this many years. I'm sure that the AI algorithms learned from that process as well. We have to figure some way of compensating for it. Again, when I'm sharing this data, who have I shared this data with others? One of the most fun things about my embeddedness with the Federal Housing Department was seeing how their data was just the start of an ecosystem of data where there were all sorts of value-added compilers and things like that that went on downstream. A huge, huge market in terms of data for housing market. And again, comes down to some important numbers, as we all know. Again, what are the ethical codes that go around it? What are the rights around the data sources? What are you trying to do with the data? Make sure that whatever the answer to these decisions is travels with the data. This is the communication about this. Do people understand the concepts on here? What are the organizations that are going to be positively affected? What are those that might be negative? Can we take some steps to minimize the negative? How are we going to engage with different groups? How are we going to be open about the project? You get the picture here. There's just a lot of really good questions to ask around this. And there's nothing wrong with answering them both from the AI perspective as well as from the data perspective. They may be very different answers, and that can tell you quite a bit about your project. You'll uncover quite a bit of project requirements if you do that sort of a process erase around it backwards. So again, key to it is not that everything is going to apply to everyone, but just showing that you made the effort to try is going to help out a lot. There's a lot more detail. You can see the reference up there, odi.org, Article Data Ethics Canvas, a really great resource given that. So let's kind of finish off here by talking about roadmap for ethics. And again, the first piece of this is to try and push literacy for AI and data governance and AI and data ethics to the literate stage, in fact, to the acumen stage, if we could, means they've got good ability to do decisions about it. We looked at adoptions of technology in the old times, and it basically, we sort of put it there, and people either used it or not. We expected them to get it. A better approach is to plan on putting really close to 80%. In other words, if you've got $1 million to put into something, put 200,000 of it into the technology and put the 80% into these other topics here. They are called translation topics. They're useful in any asset, and they help in many different ways. You'll see that as becomes a theme as we go through this section here as well. Again, this first idea here is that key technology trends are going to raise different types of issues. The doubling of computing power, the declining storage costs, although we are getting some storage costs put back perspective, and I have found some ethics issues around cloud storage. Is it, for example, ethical if your highest and best use is to maximize stockholder value to store two copies of the same data in a non-backup situation in the cloud? It seems to me that that's making the cloud vendor rich at your shareholders' expense, to put it in purely capitalist terms in there. Again, incredible differences here. Interestingly, that using a VPN is now more likely to attract attention than not using a VPN. There's multiple ways of approaching the process profiling. There's this NORA relationship, the non-obvious relationship awareness, the idea that we can find most Americans by combining just three simple pieces of data, a gender, a zip code, I forget the third piece, probably a social number or something like that. Mobile device growth. Again, these are just incredible things that are growing at a very, very rapid pace. Ethics is not in all of these areas, and it's important to take a perspective, but go back and frame it as Claire Kitchen did. Again, data governance governing the inputs and AI governance governing the AI outputs on it. It will have a tremendous simplification on your life. Second piece in this roadmap for ethics is just tell stories about all of this oftentimes and make sure that people get sick of it. Now, you guys may get sick of my voice because I'm talking here for almost an hour, but I have had people that get to me to the point where they say, "Oh, Peter, are you going to tell us the chocolate story again?" And that was when I know I have won that particular battle, because that story is embedded in the culture such that everybody understands it. And again, I won't tell you the story other than to tell you that it was a company that sold lots of chocolate, and they wanted to do chocolate around a certain time of year, and they were trying to implement multiple technology changes simultaneously, which turned out not to be such a good idea, because one thing going wrong caused many things to go wrong about this. Again, chocolate story, right? So now you've heard it, you heard a version of it, you've probably read little bits about it in papers and stuff. Maybe that's an interesting story for you, or maybe this tells why you're like or not alike the chocolate story, in order to look at that. I'm going to tell a second story here, and this is a story that I found fascinating on this. It's a good piece. I'm in the process of collecting, I believe, 1,000 data minutes that I'm going to try to collect. This is just one of them in here, but it goes back to World War II. And the theory of war at the time, according to the generals, was that the American planes would bomb during the day and the British planes would bomb at night, just taking a sort of 50-50 approach to the whole thing. And they were trying to bomb German factories, and that would keep the Germans from making things that were causing Germans to win the war. An economics unit, however, in the city of London said, no, actually, you're doing the wrong thing. You can imagine trying to change the concept of generals around this, break things, kill people, right? That's sort of their mission in order to do this. They said, no, don't do that. Kill fighter pilots, because that's the weak link in the chain. If we can kill enough fighter pilots, we'll be able to win the war. Now, we weren't winning it the other way, so it was worth a try. And the objective data on this was that pilot training ended up shortening from 250 hours of flight time to as low as 30 50 hours, meaning they were easier to shoot down and again, consequently further depleting the pool and cutting the pool shape. Again, downward death spiral literally around this. Great story, great data story around this. Find something that means something to your organization and bring that kind of a story into it so that you can apply the right concepts around these pieces. Again, taking a look at metrics, taking a look at different measurements, taking a look at whether compliance or enforcement is the process. What should be reported up? What should be reported down? Remember, there's always been a concept of if you turn a report off and nobody complains, it must have been the right decision to make. Actually, more complicated than that, but it's an interesting place to start. You've also, of course, got friends and family that you want to keep included in here in the sense that there are always going to be people that are interested. Oh, sure, send me a copy of that. But what really happens? I've done some work with the manufacturing industry recently, and there's a real great concept that they talk about, which is that a cost of $1 in the programming of whatever you're building, if you built it and it gets to the warehouse, it's going to cost somebody $10 to fix it. Probably not a great idea in there. And that if it gets out of the warehouse, it's going to cost $100 to fix. It's probably going to result in a wrong delivery or a customer loss or something along those lines that will be similarly problematic given all of that. So against the $1 fix, we can fix it in code right up front. In order to do the $10 fix, then I'm going to have to write some ETL or something to cleanse it and pay data engineers to do something what should have been a clerk's mistake to fix in there. And then, of course, the business gets an operational failure out of it as well. Really powerful example. Everybody who is working in manufacturing will understand 1, 10, 100. They'll know exactly what you're talking about. There's a number of things that'll combine to decrease our ability to actually do this. Time is one. I mentioned that in the context of the Salesforce.com. Putting Salesforce up with bad data in it is not a good way to show people how great Salesforce is. Lack of resources, ignorance, again, people not knowing about data and how it works in, understanding the fatigue that sets in of doing this for those prolonged periods of time. External influences can be problematic. Again, the boss may read something or talk to somebody on the golf course. There's all sorts of crimes that get into here as well. There are threats where people get into the idea of retaliation and things like that. Badly planned reward system where you reward for activity rather than results. In their poorly planned measures. Lots of ego. Gosh, never seen that on a project before. Boredom, financial pressures. These are all things that are going to suppress this. It's important to actually tie as much as you can this to that kind of concept so that you don't end up just having this sort of stand out. This really does show a more complete story. You've got a subject, verb, and a noun that goes all the way through this. The third step in the roadmap is to understand that every phase, whatever the phase is, has some concept of review in it from an ethics and an AI perspective. Again, discovery phase. What are the intentions of this? We can review that from the data going in. We can review it from what we want the AI to be producing on the other side of it. Design phase. Again, there's certainly going to be aspects of compliance that are going to come in. We're certainly not going to design something to be not compliant, right? That'll be intentional in their development. Maybe this is where you bring legal into the picture, looking at testing around this. What are the things that we've noticed might be a little bit out of kilter? I was watching a new movie on Galloping Gertie, if anybody remembers that today. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge that flew apart and provided some real good examples of lack of structural integrity. If you haven't seen that, take a look. Finally, during deployment monitoring, the group that I've seen that does the best of this, just to give a shout out, is the American College of Radiologists, where they have literally hundreds of AI models running around the country in production at thousands of deployed sites that are monitored in this fashion in a way that is just exemplary to take a look around this sort of thing. It can be done, but it does require a dedicated infrastructure. Nobody does this off the side of their desk in order to do this. When you do find that you need to make a correction, that you handle it in a absolutely non-blaming fashion, that it's done, again, just understanding IT people really haven't been brought through ethics as far as this goes. It's just a sort of a crazy thing of we never thought there would be any other use for it other than good. But of course, technology is neutral, and whatever we use for good can be used by the bad guys to make it evil. So it is important to take a look at this, to expect that we will make some mistakes, and that just as with everybody else, we'll learn from those mistakes. I saw a great talk the other morning where they said mistakes are just data, incorporate them, learn how to use it from that perspective, and get on. Again, just moving onwards here, it may be a good idea just to pull the ripcord occasionally and have a planned outage just to experience what that looks like. I remember one of the most productive things that I learned from Joseph Polo at one point was the week before we went off for spring break in 2020. He said, maybe it'd be a good idea to see if we can run our classes by Zoom. We didn't know we were out for the next 3 years in order to do that. Yeah, it's a good idea to try the exercises to learn what it is you need to learn how to use in order to take a look at this. Again, sort of a truism, right? A flower doesn't bloom you to fix the environment, not the flower, of course. Codes of conduct are going to give individual foci, and we've all learned from different experiences, having wonderful, varied, different types of things. Bringing all that together and seeing how it reflects as a group is a really good team building exercise. Guiding workplace behavior is typically done at what we call the work group level. So it's with you and whoever you work with as a unit in there. That's where you look for strategy. That's where you're going to be applying ethical conduct in order to do this. And it's going to grow. These things are going to be increasingly difficult in the future as they go forward, just because they're going to be more and more novel places. And most importantly, bad guys thinking of crazy things to do. I mean, I'm 67 years old. I never thought a telephone would be a bad thing, right? But I talk to young people today, like, why'd you call me? You know, yeah, that focuses in on the ethics as well. It was really bad that the phone companies sold everybody all of our numbers and then told us the numbers that which ones they had sold them to, so we could mark them as spam. Seems pretty productive for them and unproductive for anybody else. Anyway, let's get back to topic. Reward ethical behavior. Make sure that you take time out, solve whatever that challenge is in order to come up with it. Because if you don't reward the ethical behavior and celebrate it, it's not seen as this. In fact, I've got several companies that I work with where they do an annual celebration of particularly large topics and sort of reenact, and things like that, giving concepts around that. Yeah, the idea here is that we can apply this very broadly. We won't do that right away, but celebrate periodically. It's a really good idea. Deadline slips. Again, what happens on a project that makes it go faster? Very, very little around that. Finally, review, refine. If you don't take this step, and this is, I think, the hardest part to do all the way around, the idea that if we don't take a tendency to go back and reflect on what's happened, we have very little room for improvement. And so again, I like the plan, do, check, act kind of circle, virtuous circle in terms of making things better and trying to keep things going. But at the same time, it's can't be such a burden that and nobody wants to do it. And of course, the end of the project where you're, sort of trying to reflect on it is not necessarily the best time. There are wonderful things though that you can do, and this dates to work I did back at Apple originally. They had a group that was very proud of an engineering product that they had done, but they were reluctant to write up any formal documentation so that it could be tested. So we went in armed with video cameras and got them to talk about it. And boy, did they want to talk about it on film. Yes, they were really good. The point is, even if it's in the pain of the moment, it's still a good idea to get some extemporaneous things. There's so many things now that you can record to YouTube, and YouTube will transcribe it, or other ways of subscription services and things that allow you to do this. There's no reason not to categorize the lessons learned as you go through this. So we spent about an hour here looking at terms. We started off with governance and decided that in order to move forward as a society, you need to have some aspects of that. And that we looked at AI and data governance. And again, data governance is focused on the inputs, AI governance is focused on the outputs. Very nice differentiation. Ethics applies to both, all of it. And the real key is that we could look at it from these two perspectives individually. And that's probably what you have to do if you're approaching it from those perspectives. But a more useful perspective is that they've got so much in common. It just makes sort of no sense not to keep going for perspective. So looking at it as an integrated perspective is the way to do it. If your organization is fortunate enough to step in to say, we always ascribe to this under this circumstance, you may understand what ethical uses there are. If not, it's a great topic to discuss just as hypotheticals in there. I gave you three specific focuses around trying to see whether these were AI specific or data governance specific. Taking a look at this, again, give you a framework for making ethical decisions, which is just to say apply common sense to it, but it's nice to have. It's nice when you need something to be able to pull something out, even if it is only so helpful. More broadly, though, following as an organization this roadmap and making sure that it is embedded in all parts of what you do is really critical. We're going to sort of summarize here in a minute and see how it goes. So this was a AI that I put together at the end of the process to explain the role of governing data inputs and AI outcomes to prevent bad data decisions and build organizational trust. And again, 60% of business decision makers report using bad data around here. Clearly, that's something that could be improved on. And of course, the garbage in, garbage out principle is critical to this. We don't get the right stuff in, we can't possibly produce anything awesome on the other side of it. And trusting and understanding the inputs is really the goal of data governance in there. From the AI governance, again, we want to be able to say, start off by defaulting of no, but then figure out what we can safely say yes to in order to move forward, building on pillars of fairness, explainability, robustness, safety, and accountability. And explainability in particular is being ignored. I would say that the Tesla video demonstrated safety was being ignored on that particular one. We have to understand it beyond just a black box. It's got to be quite detailed. And the primary goal is trusted data, safe, ethical AI, stakeholders, and core risks. I think a very nice articulation of the whole thing. So, looking at what's going on there, we were just a second over here. Ethical isn't binary. Ethical decisions occur daily in terms of whether you're slowing for a squirrel on the road, but having a foundation or framework is the key. I know that my wife is always going to stop and pick a turtle up out of the road and get it out of the way if she can do it safely. Anyway, Mark, back over to you at the top of the hour here.
Yeah, we've got a couple of great questions and a couple of things popped into my head as we were going through here too. So I might ask
Write yours
some
down so we don't
personal
forget them, right?
questions. But we'll start from the Q&A panel here. And I love this question, and I believe the questioner probably read some of the same things that I have in the past, or is aware at least of some of the things that I've studied in this area too. Can you address historical data sets that are inherently biased? Example, bank loan history for women and minorities when they were not afforded access to loans historically. Even when using clean and organized set of historical data, bias will appear in those systems. How should these systems of data be handled?
Great question. And the
Love
answer,
that
of course,
question.
is clearly proactively. Let me put the whole slide up here for you. But yeah, the example is right off of here. If we didn't understand that if you belong to zip code 23192, that's my zip code, and they hadn't made loans out here for 30 years, and that would influence the data set and the understanding, and it would learn that those aren't done. They weren't done, therefore they shouldn't be done. And that may not be the learning that you wanted to take with you. That's the textbook answer, Mark. I'm sure you run into some creative situations as well.
I've seen, so I don't even know which one to reference, but like the overall beneficence of it is where it's at, right? And you need to have a framework in place and governance in place such that somebody can have the sober second thought. Is my model biased? Let's look at the outcome. Let's look at the algorithm and then do that constant review. Like we teach that out of the DM block all the time when talking about big data and data science. And it really is a scientific method that goes into that. But we've got to do the right thing, even if nobody's watching. I love the fact that the questioner referenced the bank loan history because I referenced that in a white paper not too long ago. There was a bank that was denying women loans because of historical data, and credit scores were being affected because of historical data and bias in the model. Because yeah, you dial the clock back so many years, and that data doesn't have the same currency to it anymore. Yet, if you're not paying attention, you treat it of the same value as anything else. So yeah, and ultimately, how should it be handled? Like, I mean, you have to have a governance process in place to catch these things in the first place, but then fix the model. Weight the model so that it reflects balance as opposed to bias inherent in the systems, is what I would say. What do you think, Peter?
Or most importantly, I agree with everything that you said, Mark. But most importantly, realize that the last thing you want is somebody else to have to go through what you're going through. And so write it down and make sure that it's attached to the data set as part of the lineage so that nobody else has to make that same mistake and suffer as a result. And yet you'd be amazed at how often it's a very difficult thing to write down here, we made a mistake. Signed Peter and Mark and May 12th, 2026.
Yeah.
Great
Um,
question. Thank you guys.
it is a wonderful question. And we've sparked some debate in the Q&A panel too. So, but we'll get to that in a second because I want to ask this next question here. I wonder if you could explore the challenges of navigating different ethical frameworks in a highly politically charged environment, including censorship, propaganda, and misinformation. And then they add to that, can the duty of care help with ethical dilemmas and uncertainties in information? I think there's a lot to unpack here in
Yeah.
that question.
That's a
This
PhD
could be
thesis
a
in there
whole
somewhere.
webinar. Yeah.
So, I was writing it down. Challenge the differences in the ethical framework uh, for, there we go. There's the ethical lenses. All right. So let's see. Can make that a little bit bigger. If you're that refined of an organization that you're debating the internal use of different lenses as an organization, um, I think I can duck and say that the second half of what you were asking doesn't make any difference until you pick the first half as the res item. Are you tracking with me on that, Mark?
I am, yeah, 100%.
We're ducking here, of course, but I'm sure you have a very detailed question and you'll not hesitate to resubmit. But again, if you were in an organization that said, we're always going to be a utilitarian organization, and therefore, one will always take the hit for the five, uh, given that. And all of a sudden, it was a friend of yours kid, right? There's about several Star Treks, the original Star Treks that describe the world through those types of things. Mark, I'm sure you could cite me chapter and verse on those. Um, Now we sort of hit the first piece. So what was the second half of the question now?
Can the duty of care help with ethical dilemmas and uncertainties in information? So I think that came up when we were talking trolley problem.
It did, and care is a challenging piece. It is one of the six ethical lenses here you can see at the bottom, but it also is a general, particularly if you have a fiduciary relationship, which most data stewards do have a fiduciary relationship, so they do have that duty of care. And that just argues that as a duty of care, your first and highest best is to your client and not to any set of sales forces that are pointing things at you to sell in there. And that you always have to act with the client in the best mind. I forget what I'd have to go find my slide on fiduciary relationships. But there's a very, very clear set of them stated out. That is separate from ethics, although it can be related in there. And so, again, you're asking three different things, each one of which I think we need to settle on one and say, okay, well, given this and this, therefore this. And quite frankly, the title of this is about AI. I have found it quite good at understanding these things. So you can notice on each of these slides, there's a URL, and Notebook LM very happily ingests it all and becomes an expert on justice and virtue and all the rest of them. And you could ask a very interesting question in that way. And I think pretty much rely on your answer because in Notebook LM, it's related to the sources that you provide. So it wouldn't have necessarily found, something external that you hadn't counted on. Does that make any sense,
Yeah,
Mark?
it does.
Mm,
And I even though that I think it's a deep and careful and difficult conversation to have in our environment, ultimately, if we're building an ethics framework that is focused on the culture of our organization and doing things the company way, aligning with the strategic goals of the company, aligning to the strategic plan, all of that sort of stuff is going to shield you a lot, or at least line up with the company's ethos. So we would do good there, but just remembering beneficence and jurisprudence, like do the right thing even when nobody's watching,
mhm.
or because I'm Canadian, we we got to be like Gretzky and skate to where the puck is going to be, and where is the good going to be? Where is the regulation going to be? What are people going to demand from us as we navigate these kinds of things? And yeah, and just don't be evil. I mean, could we just write that into our ethics programs, Peter?
Absolutely, absolutely.
We've got a couple of questions that popped up when we were talking about bias and models. I'm going to ask them both at the same time. As can we negate the bias in algorithms and models? Can you evaluate for biased outcomes without capturing consumer demographics? If not, what levels of privacy protection should consumers expect while expecting preventative bias testing?
Wow. I'll just tell you right off, I have absolutely no idea on that last question. Do you?
I do.
Good.
And the answer is yes. But it's challenging though, right? Because how are you supposed to know what bias is unless you can do deep demographic searches? But I mean, this, do you remember, Peter, the when I forget which company it was, they were launching facial recognition somewhere. This would have been back in like 2008, 2010, like in ye olde data science times. And so their training data for recognizing faces was all Caucasian people. And so it just failed miserably on persons of color, but nobody noticed that the training data lacked diversity such that it functioned. And ultimately, like that's the kind of thing that you could look at and say, okay, our training data is clearly bad. We need to make sure that we have equal representation in our training data, because it's not necessarily about an accurate portrayal of the population of a data set. That's not what we're doing in a lot of these cases. We're building a model that is going to treat everybody equally and be beneficent, right? So uh, this isn't sunshine, unicorn, and fairyland for statisticians. We don't have to build a perfectly random data set, and in most of the time, we shouldn't. We can pick and choose our data sets to fix issues and bias, but it's going to depend on the model and it's going to depend on the goal of your AI solution. That's my
It,
long-winded answer, Peter.
no, I think it was great. The thing that has scared me in the past is that just like we saw with the Internet of Things, the cheaper the things were made, the less security that they had on them.
This is still
And
true today.
Absolutely, it's still true. And unfortunately, the same thing is going to be true for AI. And so the reason that we got in this bad situation, particularly with respect to Joy's situation, is again, the movie's called Coded Bias. It's on Netflix, and every university, as far as I know, in the country has purchased a copy of it. So you can just go to the university, visit their library, and watch it. It's worth 90 minutes of your time. She's so articulate. And the idea that we had this easy to get data set that had 100,000 faces in it. And the fact that they were all pale males was not considered a problem. And it was easy as you as a college student, you know how much money you have when you're a college student, which is none. And so the idea that you could purchase a data set that had more representation in it, that's nice, but you're always going to take the freebie. And it just like the IoT caused so many of these things to do so poorly. And yet we have, as a result, people of color getting arrested at a higher rate because there are higher mismatches around there of the thing reporting false positives. Again, if the cops knew that the data they were getting was 10% false, they might consider when they got into the situation sometimes that this could be one of those situations that's not as bound as they say it is, given all of this.
100%. I'm getting asked in chat here if there is a book associated with that icon of the hand and the water flowing through the hand. Is that a book
No,
cover?
that's not a
That's
book
just an
cover.
icon? Oh, okay.
Icon, yes. Joy has written a wonderful book. And as I said, Coded Bias is great. And if you're a book reader, Kathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction, or if you've ever seen her, she's got some YouTube videos out there that are just delightful.
Yeah, Coded Bias is Joy's book, right? Coded
Hmm.
Bias? Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, somebody's asking about fraud detection, which I just love. So I'm going to skip to this one. How can banks use AI fraud detection systems ethically while protecting customer privacy and avoiding unfair decisions? Do you have a thought on that, Peter?
At least personally, I'm very much not enamored with the total attempt that they have. Both of my charge cards deny it first and then send me a text and say, "Did you just try to do that?" I was like, "Yes, I'm trying to buy tickets for Fish at the Sphere." And so then it goes through the second time, but it's the wrong way to do it. And I've got a wonderful 30-year track history record of data with them that ought to give me some sort of dispensation on this. But it keeps getting more and more difficult to use on this. So, from a fraud detection perspective, again, just the idea that you've chosen to go into a profession where you have to be perfect and they only have to get lucky is a difficult
Yeah.
proposition as it is. And hats off to you. But at the same time, there are things that the whole area there is just learning. And one of them has been data analysis and integrating data of different types and having their physical security integrated with their digital security. Although nowadays, for some companies, it's a no-brainer, there's still lots of places that have them separate and consequently are subject to um, infiltration and et cetera, much less manipulation around this. I mean, one of the good reasons that our system is the way it is and people trust it is because it's very hard to hack 13,000 individual voting systems. Whereas, Mark, my understanding is you guys still have a single centralized system, right?
We do up here. Yeah, and it's all paper-based, but I mean, that's not
But you
fair
have
to
confidence in
compare.
it.
We
No,
do,
I mean,
but I'm like and I've invigilated elections as well, so I get to like count ballots and stuff every once in a while. But I mean, it's different because it's all we have a ballot and you have one choice on it. You, we don't have the multi-page complex ballots up here. So I mean, the the scalability of the problem is different, which lends
mhm.
itself well to um trustability, right? Does that make sense?
It does. And what they were questioning about was banking fraud. And so, of course, if that's the area that you want to do, you start off by studying and saying what are the characteristics of it and what would be things that we can think about from a completely naive perspective, where you don't have all this history of existing conditions and approaches. And um, I think Penn intelligently commented on, or I guess it's just Penn, commented on some aspect of society recently that he hadn't been able to do. But he said, I feel confident as a musician that I'm qualified to, sorry, musician, confident as a magician that I'm competent to comment on this particular field in order to do that. And it just sort of was interesting from that perspective. It's like, yeah, who else than the Fooler would be good at doing that?
Well, I do like banking as an example because they've been in this space for ages, right? Like
There have been books and
us
articles, there are
AI
journals,
nerds
higher
have
math
been
that,
doing
yep.
AI stuff for banks for 20 plus years, even longer than that. But for banks, they skew a model so that you have more false positives than false negatives. And you'd think you would want that. I would rather my card get declined um, erroneously and know that they have a detection system in place that's meant to protect me than to miss it, right?
And again, perfectly reasonable in order to make that particular judgment on it. The question is when you have it set as a default and you don't know what the default is, that
Yeah.
puts you as a citizen more at risk.
Yeah, this reminds me of the story out of the UK actually, where they put a system in place to catch mail fraud done by staff, and somebody just asked, and here you need to monitor staff for fraud as well. And in this particular case, it had identified dozens of cases of staff committing mail fraud, but the model was just wrong.
Hmm.
And so there were all of these people that were criminally charged erroneously because the model was wrong and like it was a failure all the way up and down the stream of this up and down the stack of this model.
And the
And
post office got mad at me. What did I do?
yeah, well, and in this particular case though, that five workers ultimately took their own lives because of what happened in this
Ooh,
story. They were erroneously charged and accused of criminal behavior, even though they've been working there for like decades. It's just absolutely crazy what happens with stories like this, where ethics isn't considered or bias isn't looked at or problems with the model isn't considered. And I think if we do our best and take a look at these things, review these things, have an ethical framework in place, have an ethics policy, have an ethics standard at your organization, you're going to be better off than flying by the seat of your pants, as it were.
should I replacing can I? Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Again, just thanks to Claire for coming up with such a nice articulation here. Just makes
I
it
love this.
very
Yeah, I've
easy.
seen this on LinkedIn before too. And yeah, so it's so nice. Yeah, I like how she draws this out. Um, we do have a slightly off topic question, but not really. And I'm sure you have an opinion here as well, Peter. I've noticed some companies hiring for data and AI a governance manager, for example. So should we combine the two roles? Do you think that's a good approach or a bad approach, or is it even feasible?
Well, I know you have an opinion. I'll go ahead and go first. My guess is that well, the point of this webinar was that a lot of the things that these two groups do are in common, and cleaning the data on the way in can be helpful for both AI governance and data governance. Um, my sense of trying to split my head across these two areas in any sort of an organization that was moving, and I was being added late to the mix would be not a great outcome, given that situation. So I would prefer to not have them combined in there, and to keep them separate. But that may be just because I'm rather small-minded and can't handle too many things going on at one time. What do
That's
you
not
think,
fair,
Mark?
Peter.
What do you think?
You know what? I largely agree with you here. I think the vast majority of the time they should be separate. There's a little bit of a consultant answer here, though, where it depends, and I think size and scale of an organization depends. If everybody's wearing the same hats And you've got your committees for one, committees for another, your structure for one, your structure for another, and it's all the same people, but maybe sometimes the roles are a little bit different. I could see some coalescing going on, and maybe that's okay. But the oversight of data governance is different than the oversight of AI governance. So the altitude of decision making and the levers people have to pull, especially as it relates to ethics, is going to be different for those two areas. Now, there's still overlap, 100%, but the because that different exists, and the role difference exists, I think it's wiser to maintain some separation for our own sanity. Future us will be happier if we have some separation, but recognize the in tandem collaborative nature between those two functions at an organization.
Well articulated. I can't think of anything to add to it than that. Yes, certainly agree. The motivational part is the part that I tend to ground towards the first, and uh, reminded that the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, has this dual role of both promoting airline safety and also promoting the airline industry. This has been a week where we've lost Spirit Airlines, the butt of everybody's joke, but in fact turned out to be that it's going to be a very bad thing for the American economy because we're losing a
Yeah.
low-cost provider, and having them out of the picture there. And not just out of the picture, but actually out of the picture because the private equity firm that owned the airline decided that the gate and the airline themselves were worth more than the money that the Trump administration was willing to put up, and that's why they ended up being liquidated. So while they can boo-hoo-hoo all they want, it was the private equity funds that were really in charge of it around that topic. And it's just sort of a sad state of affairs where, the general public is not knowing that as a whole, that the airline went out of business, not because uh, I'm sure it was bad economic conditions, yes, but the real reason was because the private equity guys had to get their money out and wanted to get it out in that fashion in order to do it as a rather awkward scenario given that. I'm not sure how that relates to our topic, but it was definitely unethical, at least not to be understanding of it.
Well, and from an economic perspective, you're removing choice from the marketplace, which is one of the core tenets of economics, right? Ultimately, people can choose, and that's what makes economies work. And I mean, that's true for ethics as well. Um, we choose to do the right thing. We choose to not misinform. We do the right thing when nobody's watching, right? Um, we've sparked a wonderful comment in chat that I think we could probably finish this webinar with. Um, you've commented to add your faux pas or lessons learned to the model. My question would be, where should it be added? In metadata, in the AI tool itself? What about the weights you may apply to balance it? Would you consider documenting these as part of the model, a fix to the issue versus adding additional data over time? Is there a lifespan to apply these lessons learned? That's another webinar, I think, Peter.
Absolutely. Great question, though. And the real key is that as you're doing this, regardless of what the circumstances are, um, the key for it is that any type of documentation that you do that is in existence. I remember being aghast the first time I learned that Excel didn't search hidden cells. When you were looking for something, so you had to make sure that you unhid everything and then searched, rather than searching and then discovering the other way. Having any sort of a handle on it like that, or making it good practice, whether it's a blob or a diagram or just a audio comment, it still will be extremely helpful in the future as organizations are trying to figure out what happened back then and why you took the actions that you did. It'll be very, very good. So the idea of attaching it to the metadata is great. Again, any sort of a blob kind of thing like that, or many organizations are using sort of wikis and things like that for internal communications and the like in order to do that. But yes, understanding those reasons is so critical to making sure that you have it. I'll just do this one last slide here too, which is this part. Again, just making sure that every single phase has it involved in there as well, and that even our understanding of that will evolve over time in a way that's going to be much more helpful than waiting till one phase and trying to get it exactly right. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, you
Over to
mentioned
you,
plan,
Mark.
do, check, act as well, like the
Hmm.
PDCA cycle, which is critical. I think ultimately it's going to depend on what we're solving, what we're fixing, where the bias was. Like in data quality, Peter, we like to say fix as close to source as possible. I mean, this is one of those cases a lot of the times with data science models or with AI, where you're not going to make a change, nor should you, in an enterprise system because you're dealing with testing a hypothesis and looking for correlations in data rather than um, uh, making a change to the enterprise data itself. The enterprise data could be 100% correct and accurate. We don't want to fix for bias in a tactically correct data set, right? So I think bias needs to be corrected differently. How do you maintain that? I think that is part of the answer. What somebody said to me, and Peter, I want you to finish your thoughts on this, and what your thoughts are on this to end out the webinar. Is we're starting to say that metadata is part of an organization's crown jewels. And I think there's more value and more confidentiality in metadata today than ever before. And that concept is very true if we're correcting for bias in AI or in a semantic layer. What do you think, Peter?
I,
Let's finish on
I
that
I
topic.
had a woman who I worked with very carefully over a number of years period who called me up after having not seen her for a couple of years and says, I finally won. And I said, oh my goodness, what is it that you finally won? And she says, our lawyers have decided that our metadata is IP and I'm not allowed to talk about it anymore. I was
Neat.
like, all right, yes, I'm with you. So yes, you
Yeah,
knew where I was coming down on that one.
that's
All
awesome.
right.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you guys.
Well, thank you,
Thank you, Mark.
everybody. Thanks for the wonderful webinar. Thank you to our community for being so electric, as always. And have a wonderful rest of the day.
We'll see you next month. Cheers.